Hello.
Hey Ray, it's Rachel.
Hi, Rachel. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So I'm really excited. We're going to have this conversation today.
You too. Really looking forward to it.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, I'm ready to just get started. If that's okay with you. If you have any questions
Yeah.
before we get going.
No, that's great. Let's go ahead and jump in.
Okay. Hi, everyone. This is Ray Lufkin, the creative activist, and today my special guest is Rachel Grant. She's the owner and founder of Rachel Grant Coaching and is a sexual abuse recovery coach, author of Beyond Surviving, The Final Stage in Recovery from Sexual Abuse. She holds an MA in counseling psychology, is a member of the San Francisco Coaches, and a CSA survivor force. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you. So nice to be here, Ray.
Thank you. I have a question though before we get started. Did it say it was recording when you
It
got
did.
on? Okay, perfect. Okay. I just want to make sure. So, Rachel, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspires you and the work you're doing?
Well, I am, your everyday person, I suppose. And, kind of grew up in a small town and went through childhood sexual abuse. And really set out to be a high school English teacher, Ray. I didn't have any intentions of going into this field or doing this work. Along the way in my journey of trying to deal with the repercussions of the abuse I experienced, I just hit this place in my own walk where I thought, things really are not getting better, and I'm continuing to have the same struggles with self-esteem and in relationships and trust and all of the above, the usual. And so I just found my way slowly but surely becoming more curious about this whole world of recovery and what it would really take for a person to heal and move on. I started to get really frustrated around kind of my early 20s, right around mid 20s, with what I was experiencing in the form of care. I was certainly doing a lot of talking about the abuse and what had happened, and there's definitely a time and a place for that. But after a while, I started to feel really frustrated with that and thinking, gosh, this is starting to feel like it's just going to be a life sentence, right? I'm going to be spending the
I
rest of my life with this. Oh,
I
man.
totally get that, and I know I used to say, yeah, it was talk therapy, and I felt like I was surviving, but not thriving in any way.
Hmm.
It got me to a place of stabilization and a certain amount of self-esteem, so I could get married and all those pieces. But it was a continuous struggle, and I know I had to step away from traditional talk therapy to find my own path. So why don't you talk a little bit about that and some of the things that you've explored and the models that you've experienced over the years that have made you who you are today?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that happened for me along the way was beginning to really research and study neuroscience. I read a book by Dan Siegel called The Developing Mind as a part of my master's in counseling psychology program. And I was really thinking about what my next step was going to be. Am I going into therapy? Is it something else? And kind of building this business and thinking about what it would look like. And when I read that book, it just so many things like clicked into place. I was like, oh, like that's why I respond this way in these situations. And oh, that's what's happening to the brain when I'm triggered. And wow, that's really fascinating. And so I really started to think about the process of healing and what would it look like to take this new understanding of the brain and apply that to all of the different areas in my life where I felt like I was still struggling, and think about it as a brain injury almost.
Oh, that's a really
Like,
unique way of looking at it. I've never heard anybody really say that until you. Yeah.
yeah. And so rather than it becoming this, deep psychological issue that I need to unpack and figure out how my mother is to blame, it's like, what if I just think about this like an injury? And then that led me to the next layer of it, which was looking at it as skills, life skills. as being the main thing that I was lacking. Having grown
Can
up
you
with...
talk a little bit more about it for people who are like, what is she talking about?
Well, so one of the things I, notice about myself, and certainly about the many survivors that I've had, the joy of working with, is it's like we miss pieces growing up. Basic skills like setting boundaries or judging risk, even coming down to just like integrity. What does that even mean? What does it even mean to have integrity? And some of that gets missed because we're too busy dealing with abuse. We're just trying to get by and survive and cope and manage, and our nervous system and our neurological systems, our biochemistry, everything is being disrupted by trauma. So it's really hard to take in what we need to be taking in when we're growing up. Emotional intelligence, awareness, judgment. And so I often think about healing as, growing up as an adult. There is another really great book that I love, Growing Up When You're Already Grown Up.
I've never heard of that one. Okay.
Yeah, I'm forgetting the author's name right now, but this kind of led me to this, thinking about it in these two ways of sometimes it's a skill and I just need to learn that skill. I just need a tool in order to be able to do what seems to happen so easily for other people who haven't gone through trauma, but it's not because it just naturally happens for them. It's just that they learned those things along the way. And then what are those things that on a neurological and on a nervous system level that I need to heal? Like I have an injury that I need to heal, and how do I do that? Like what does that process look like, and what are the steps for that? Mm-hmm.
I love that. That's a really, like I said, a very interesting analogy. And I never really applied that to my own life, when I was healing. And yet I wonder if that would have changed things and made it not a quicker recovery and going through the trauma, but it would have changed it. Because for the longest time, I just said, healing is a lifelong process. Well, I felt like I was in doomsday, and it was, or the groundhog thing, where that was my motto, and I had to change that. That was one of those thinking tools that I had to change my mindset and said, that's not the truth of this, that there are things that and I guess maybe, let's ask, what is your definition of healing?
So for me, healing is stripping away all of the layers that are there as a result of abuse that are keeping us disconnected from our authentic self. And when I say authentic self, all I really mean by that is just, the person who was supposed to be here before all of that bullshit happened to us, right? When we can just, be ourselves, and there isn't a sense that, that there's something kind of constantly interfering with or getting in the way of us being able to do that.
Right, and I think, it's the words we say to ourselves, the patterns that we've taken as true, that I don't deserve to be happy, or you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, and how does that affect your life when you're never feeling safe in the world? Those kinds of things keep you from going after your authentic, your dreams that you are here, and the person you're meant to be. And so I think those are really critical. I know those are the ones that came up for me many times and still do at times, I mean, it's like, it always surprises me, it's like when I go there, it's like, oh, really? I mean, I obviously can address it quicker and deal with it, and it's not the sense of, I'm laying in bed for a week or I can't function.
Exactly. Oh man, yeah, Ray, I totally identify with that. Mm-hmm.
Those were the two that were the biggest for me, I think. And even, I know you're doing a lot of work on intimacy right now with people, and intimacy, what does that mean? And how can you have those relationships with people? And what does it really mean to open yourself up and open your heart and trust that person will be patient, kind, and you'll go into your own head about, well, can I trust this person? Will they hurt me? The things that we experienced as children that have they may not be conscious, but in the background, they still can run the show at times.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I think, one of the things I talk about with my clients in the Beyond Surviving program is that there are triggers that we can eliminate.
Right.
There is a way to then also decrease the number of triggers and how often we go into a triggered state. And then we decrease the worst case scenario is if you get triggered, that we decrease how long you stay stuck there, right?
Right.
And how much it disrupts your life. And that's been, I think, for me, the thing that has been really fascinating to watch in my own life and in the life of my clients is to go from a place where, literally every day, multiple times a day, going into triggered states, and all I mean by that is just, you lose your sense of self, you get, anxious, you get angry, you feel reactive or out of control. Sometimes it's dissociating and withdrawing. And to be doing all of that, multiple times a day, my gosh, it's just so exhausting. It's debilitating. It, destabilizes you. So to get to a place where, that happens, once every 6 months or something, and usually when I'm tired
Right.
and hungry.
Right, yeah.
Oh, man.
So how do you address this? What are some of the tools and the ideas that you share with your clients to address these issues?
Well, so over the years, what I've kind of developed is a step-by-step system or program, because what I started to realize for myself was when I was really in the pain of the trauma and trying to figure out, how the hell am I going to get out of this, it seemed like a mountain of stuff. And sometimes I call it or a plate of spaghetti. There's all this stuff interconnecting and then woven together. And, I got to deal with this and I got to deal with that. And what about this problem? And that in and of itself would shut things down for me, because I just felt like I don't know where to start. I just don't even know where to begin. So for me, the place where we always begin is the brain and getting the system regulated. Because when we enter into a healing journey, and we do have a lot of these things to tackle, shame, trust, learning to communicate, intimacy, vulnerability, if our system isn't regulated and therefore we're constantly going into panic attacks or flashbacks or, dissociating, then it's really hard to learn those skills or tools that we need to learn and to take the actions we need to take and practice the things. So that's where I start with all of my clients, is really doing what I call a boot camp for the brain. And teaching people how to retrain their brain, how to regulate their nervous system, what to do if you're triggered, and also how to avoid being triggered, as well as how to eliminate triggers. And from there, we go on to explore, shame. We go on to explore the emotional life. And, the other thing, Ray, that I really paid really close attention to was, what order do we need to do these things in? We definitely want to touch on all of these things, but is there actually a particular order that would lead to the best results and the best outcomes? So that's something that I really experimented with as I was developing my program. I sometimes talk about it as the order of operations.
Okay.
So, I thought very much like baking, right? If you've got to put the right proportion of things in, and you've got to put things in the right order. Yeah. Because if you don't, then you don't get a very nice cake. You don't get good results. And so that's something that I think has been a big part of my work and the development of this program, is trying to sort that out in order to lead to the best outcomes possible.
So what is the best one to start with besides the brain? What is the other things to tackle first? What would you do?
Yeah. So from there, the next thing that we want to look at is shame, because all of those messages that we have about ourselves are also destabilizing. And when we are based in shame, and taking responsibility for the abuse, blaming ourselves for the abuse, going into belief systems like we're unlovable, we're worthless, we're not deserving, then again, how can we do any kind of work around building relationships? Because if you don't even believe you're deserving, like I could talk to you about relationships and how to trust and all that, but it's not going to go anywhere because at the core you feel unlovable or undeserving. So we really tackle shame in the next module of the program and moving that out of people's way.
Okay. Now, I know you said, you had done talk therapy before. So what makes this different when you're working with them on shame?
Yeah. So I think the key distinction between coaching and therapy is how you're working with the issues and who is deciding what issues are being worked with. So in therapy, the client is driving the conversation. So you sit down on the couch, as I did so many times in my life, and you're like, I just had a pissy fight with my partner, right? And then that becomes the session. And the therapist doesn't redirect most of the time. The therapist just leans in, as a therapist should, meeting the client where they are, holding space for them, sometimes offering guidance or perspective, asking great questions to help the person kind of find their way through what they're experiencing. And more so today than in the past, but therapists are beginning to think about, next steps and offering tools. But most of the time, it's just, a space where you can be seen and heard. And that is so critical. And we need that at a particular stage of healing, the second stage, what that I call the survivor stage. But when we enter into a space where we're now ready to resolve the issues and we want to do something about it, that sort of reflection space isn't going to get the job done. So in coaching, the agenda, first of all, is set. This isn't all coaches, but in my program, we use the Beyond Surviving Guidebook as our roadmap for our work together. So we know what we're looking at each session. And of course, life is happening, so it becomes organic in some places, but that structure is there to serve my clients. And every single issue that arises is named, acknowledged, but then very quickly, great, what are we going to do about that? And that's the key distinction that all of my clients talk about. Is very different for them once they're in this world of coaching. It's like, whoa, like you're not just going to sit there and nod.
I'm not allowed to sit here and just talk about it. I have to do something. Yeah.
Exactly. Which is why I call this a third stage of healing, because sometimes we're not ready for that, and that's okay. It's a process of moving through. What I worry about, Ray, and what I'm really kind of on a mission to put an end to is people who spend 20 years in rumination about their trauma. Because actually, at a certain point, after we, have kind of named it, processed it, made connections, when we continue to reiterate the experience without getting into any solution or healing, we are actually reinforcing that on a neuronal pathway.
Right. Level. That's the story we're telling, and we will respond in body, heart, mind, and soul. Yes, to that victimhood, and that keeps you not even as a survivor; it keeps you as a victim. I believe in that totally. Yeah. And when you interviewed me, we were talking a little bit about art and visioning and those kind of tools, which is what I have incorporated into my own life. And I used to work with a lot of survivors and take them to that place. It's like, you got to envision what you'd love, and I know that may not come easily, but, you can look through magazines, you get ideas, you read books, and, that appeals to me. What would you love is a challenging question for somebody in the middle of survivor and victimhood, that level. And so I always felt like, I was not the person to ever talk to at the beginning stages or even the middle. I needed to be at the end, as you would call it, your third phase, because that is the place where I felt I could do the most good and help you find new ways to talk about what you would love. I always use simple art and writing activities. I again, because they also created new neural pathways. So I wanted to change the actions as well as the dialogue.
Yep. Exactly. Love that. Mhm.
Yeah. So so I so appreciate where you are because you're the first person I had heard really who focused on that last aspect. And that was so critical for my own growth. And I didn't have a guide. I was my own guide. I was, I'll try this, I'll try that. And I think there are so many people out there who are still doing that, or they've just given up. There's nobody there they feel they can help take them to that next level. And that's the other reason they just sort of stay there, not.
Yeah,
Some of it is
that's
there's
right.
nobody to guide me who I really feel's gotten there and that has a real program. So I truly love that you have a program that people can get invested in and find what they are looking for. Now,
Nice. Thanks, Ray. Yeah.
can you tell people a little about your practice? Is it individual? Is it group?
Oh, yeah. Sure. So there are a couple of different ways that people can work with me. So as an introductory way, I have a monthly support group that's donation-based. And that is not the Beyond Surviving program, but I do offer support, and we look at different themes each month. So for example, this month we're looking at anger. And so it's more like an open community. People drop in and drop out of that call. It's by phone once a month. And so that's always a great way to kind of get an introduction and get some support, especially actually if you're in that survivor stage and you're kind of wondering, like, am I ready for that next step, or where am I? So I have a lot of people who drop into those calls once a month. And you can learn more about that at rachelgrantcoaching.com/ASCA. From there, Ray, the next step up is my online course, the 28-day boot camp for the brain. So this is actually drawing from the longer program some of those main skills that I teach in the first module of the longer program. Not everything, but a large majority of them. So this is a wonderful first step program or foundation program for folks. And it's all delivered online, and there are video trainings, and really meant to help people gain those skills for kicking PTSD to the curb and learning how to regulate their neurological, their brain systems and their nervous systems. And so that's a really lovely kind of first step. And that's at rachelgrantcoaching.com/bootcamp. And then there's my group program and my Beyond Surviving one-on-one program. And both of those are following the longer curriculum. And so it's
And how long is that curriculum, Rachel? How long is that curriculum?
So if you're working with me in a group setting, it's a 4-month program. And if you're working with me one-on-one, it's an 8-month program.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. I was just listening to Robin Sharma give a talk, and he was saying that the new research out of the University of London is it takes 66 days for a new habit, and I had not heard that before. And I'm like, well, that's really interesting because that's going to change a lot of people's programs as they go along. If you have, that month doesn't work anymore. So I was
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just really interesting. So what would you say for yourself? One, what is it that helped you heal the most of everything that you researched and learned besides the brain study and plasticity and things like that? What actual experiential pieces did you do?
Can you say that one more time? I'm not sure I got the full
Okay, yeah, I'm trying to understand, I understand that the brain was the piece that was this aha moment, but I'm trying to, I take it to the next, I'm very experiential, and it's like I have that hands-on, draw, color, that kind of thing, and write.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if there was any particular activities that you've ever done that helped you beyond, in the arts that has made a difference in your life.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think writing for me has been a very important piece of my healing journey. Writing poetry, writing stories, just journaling in general, and using writing as a way to express and release things for myself. And I think dance as well, being able to spend time, getting into my body. And one of the things I love the most about dance is that for me, I can really lose myself in that, meaning I stop thinking about everything that's come before and everything that's going to come after, and I'm just present. And that act and that availability of learning what it's like to just be present and using dance as a way to access that, I think really has helped a lot in helping me translate that into my, my day to day. And mhm.
I like that term, being present, because as somebody who experienced that trauma, you spend so much time either in the past or the future. The present doesn't feel real, or on many cases, and it's scary. Who am I without my past is a question, and who am I in the future, which I don't know. So, those are some of the, so I totally get that. And I think I love how you're talking about dance, because dance keeps you in your body, which is the other piece that, for me, my body was the enemy for many, many years, and I was like, it was a terror. And I am still struggling up until now with, not with body image in the same way, but loving my body as it is, in an aging process. And, I've lost weight, but it's learning to love myself despite that, and just the body that I have. And that's the being present again. So
yes, very much so.
Yeah. So I think, there's, there are so many people. You can find ecstatic dance. You can do, I know somebody else who's been working with belly dancing for herself in healing.
Nice.
So again, it's a very sensual dance. It's very rhythmic. It's moving the hips, and talk about that paradigm of, I can't move my hips. That's too sexual. That's too this, and then dealing with that. So it's a really interesting thing. I know for me, I took belly dancing before I ever started therapy. I dropped out of college. It was just like when I was just starting therapy, and I took a belly dancing class, and it was it felt so foreign. I still remember how to do circle rolls, but it's really interesting.
Right. Oh my gosh, right? Yeah, I think that more and more, what I think about, the way I think about this, Ray, is that I think a lot of the principles, there's actually a lot of beautiful overlap in the work that I do and in the work that, like, say, my colleague Irene Lyon does. And it's a lot of times just the way that we enter into the work, right? So I know people who are doing that from a somatic place. I work at it more from a neurological, cognitive place. But more and more, I'm loving to kind of blend in and integrate, creative arts and all of these different pieces. We still have our thing that we're most gifted at or most drawn to.
Right.
And I think that's one of the beautiful things about there being, a range of modalities that, some people don't resonate with my work. That whole brain thing, it just doesn't click with them, or it doesn't click with them right away. But after they go and they do some, body work, they come back and they go, okay, now I'm ready for that brain stuff, right?
Right. I know. I mean, originally I was going to write a book called Survivor to Thriver, an Odyssey of Healing, and I was going to do this in the early 90s. And this was before there was any real books out there and memoirs and things like that, and it was interesting. So I did some research. I did original research, and this is before computers and all that kind of stuff. And I had hand research 150 people who self-identified as thriving, and my premise was that there were more modalities than talk therapy, and it was forgiveness was a big part. Body work, because brain plasticity wasn't discussed in those days. I think I said forgiveness, and the artwork and those kind of things, and spirituality. Those were all new concepts in the early 90s. And it's like nobody talked about it. Eventually, Laura Davis did in her book, in her seminal work, but it was new, and I wish I'd written the book. I never did. I kept the research until about 3 years ago, and I just threw it out. I mean, I kept the actual questionnaires, but I think, it proved to be right. My hypothesis has proved to be right after all these years, and that kind of thing. But yeah, those were new concepts, just like brain plasticity is still relatively new, as is positive psychology, and I think those two go hand in hand in healing.
Beautiful. Yeah. Awesome. Wow, man, we covered a lot of ground in a quick amount of time.
We did it in a short period of time. So do you have any final thoughts for people? What would you like to say?
Sure. Well, for anyone who's kind of wondering, where am I in my healing journey and which stage am I in, that us talking about that has piqued their interest, then I really encourage you to go to rachelgrantcoaching.com/checklist. And there's a very, kind of straightforward guide that will help you assess where you are in your healing journey and also give you some suggestions based on where you are on the goals to be focusing on and the type of support to receive. So just another resource there. And then final thought, I just really want to let everybody know who's listening, who is a survivor of abuse, that there really is a pathway out. I know there are days of despair. I know there are days where it just feels like it's never going to change. It's never going to get any better. But and I've been there. But I really hope you'll take what we've shared today as a moment of hope and inspiration that you can really recover and heal from these experiences and go on to have a really beautiful life. So, and of course, if anything I've shared today has resonated with you and you'd love to learn more, then, head on over to the website and look at the options there for taking the next step to do that. I'd be happy to be a support to you in your journey.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. And also, Rachel does a podcast as well. So she's got some archives that you'd love to listen to. That's another way to start learning about Rachel and the wonderful work she does. She is an incredible healer. I call you a healer. And, so thank you, Rachel. I so appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Ray. It's been a joy.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Rachel, you